the feds are basically protecting Jeffrey Epstein in 2007-ish.
I think so.
That's what's infuriating about all this, leaving aside, a lot of other elements that are upsetting. But the most infuriating is just the two tiers or multi-tier system of justice.
So recently, Tucker Carlson had an interview where he discussed the truth about Jeffrey Epstein's sweetheart plea deal, the deal he made with Alexander Aosta in 2008 to avoid serious punishment for sexual offenses, which there were about 40 witnesses attesting to, by the way, and how the cover-up really began from the start, and how this has influenced the cover-up even now. This is in the context of a conversation with Darryl Cooper, who's done a great deep dive into the Epstein case. Both men know the Epstein case very well, so let's get their take on it. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
They start looking into this guy, and they start building out a case. You have this woman, Villanueva, I think her name was, who was the lead prosecutor for the U.S. Attorney's Office on the Epstein case, and she, from all appearances at least, was very enthusiastic and earnest about trying to pursue this case, and was very upset about how the whole thing was handled by her superiors. But they're building out a case, and they get to the point where, and this was actually even before the West Palm Beach Police Department did this, the feds got handed a case with 40-something on-the-record underage witnesses accusing this guy, corroborating each other's stories, telling the exact same story of how they were recruited, what happened when they got there, what they were asked and made to do, everything down the line. Right? This is like when the West Palm Beach first went to the prosecutor after they started building their case. They said the guy like sort of chuckled and laughed. He was like, "This is gonna be the easiest case I've ever done. This is open, and we're gonna put this guy away for 100 years. Like, this is the easiest case we're ever gonna do." And he can't do it at the state level, so he hands it over to the feds. And open and shut, how do you get away from 40 on the record corroborating independent witnesses, right? You can discredit 1 or 2 or 10, you still got 30 left, And goes to the feds, and they build out the case more, they bring in more witnesses, they gather more evidence. And all of a sudden, the prosecutor, she starts running into obstacles of her own. One of the things, for example, they found out was that the computers that had been taken out of his house in West Palm Beach were in the possession of somebody connected to Epstein's lawyers. And so she put out a Department of Justice subpoena demanding those computers from the lawyers and the people. And the lawyers kind of, they delay and have meetings and, put things off and so forth. And these are some of them people we've heard of, Alan Dershowitz, people like that, who they delay, and so one day she goes to her bosses and she kind of grills them a little bit, like, what the hell is going on here? She wrote this in an email, actually. She was very aggressive about it, though. She's like, I don't know what's happening here. I don't know what the deal is, but like we have a child predator on our hands with an open and shut case to put this guy away for the rest of our life. What is the problem here?
Yeah, there was clearly a cover-up from the federal authorities from the very beginning. There is also an instance in this episode he's talking about now where Epstein was actually tipped off to the fact that they were going to serve a search warrant at his house. It seems like that was allowing him to get his computer systems and things like that out in time because he was tipped off to these things. This was a career-building open and shut case. Eventually we see this sweetheart plea deal is something out of another universe that no one can still believe, that he gets 13 months under kind of a home release program where he gets to take over a wing of the sheriff's department. None of it makes sense, and the feds were in on it from the start. It just didn't make sense, but I do agree with him. Earnestly, it seemed like the local prosecutor did want to put this guy behind bars. It was the cover-up seemed to have been coming from the federal government and eventually Alex Aosta, who eventually becomes the Secretary of Labor. We'll talk about him later, perhaps.
And she gets reprimanded and told in no uncertain terms, your attitude is not appreciated and you need to back off and all these kind of things by her superior. And so then one day, and this is while the subpoena's out for those computers, Alex Aosta personally goes and cuts a deal with Epstein's lawyers without telling the lead prosecutor who's looking into the case, without telling the victims, which is in contravention of victims' rights law. If you're going to cut a deal with a sex offender you got to tell the victims, hey, by the way, this is what's happening. Here's why we're doing it. And just so you know, he's going to be out of jail in a year or something. You have to tell them. It's a law.
This guy wind up as labor secretary.
That is a story worth looking into. I don't know. But
a lot of candidates for the gig.
So
why that guy?
Yeah, he comes in.
Sorry.
Yeah, good question. He was Trump's labor secretary. One of the most kind of unexplained, well, maybe explainable things about this case is, cover up or part in the cover up of this may have led to his ascension in power. Again, this is something almost no one asked, and I'm so glad that the legacy media is dying, being replaced by programs like Tucker when he talks to Darryl Cooper about these things. These things are not being printed in mainstream news media, that Aosta did this.
Right.
And he cuts a deal with the lawyers that says that the federal government agrees not to prosecute Epstein for any of the crimes that are being alleged, any related crimes that have yet to be alleged, nor will they prosecute any of his accomplices, known or unknown. So crimes that come out in the future committed by people who aren't known about yet, those are covered under this immunity as well, right? It's the most blanket you can possibly imagine. And as a condition of the deal, the subpoena for his computers was dropped. Okay.
Yeah, so not even are they going to look at evidence that could implicate more people in this obvious child sex ring operation, which was likely a cover for a foreign intelligence service, maybe Mossad. Not only that, he barely was punished, and this just doesn't make any sense. Darryl's highlighting it perfectly. The other thing about this is you can still find documentation of this online today if you look for the documents in this case. As part of that plea deal that he got from Aosta, he also agreed to act as an informant to the FBI in limited capacity. This is another thing that they just don't talk about. So we know that he was, to some extent, an informant, at least in this regard. And yeah, it's not the first time that Epstein has acted as an informant of sorts with the feds. He did cooperate in their investigation of Towers Financial, which was a company set up by one of Epstein's associates, Stephen Hoffenberg, who eventually committed what was one of the greatest and biggest Ponzi schemes in U.S. history. They were siphoning money from new investors to pay old investors. And Stephen Hoffenberg said, hey, Epstein was actually the chief architect of this scheme, even though he didn't go down for it. Stephen Hoffenberg did for like 18 years. And Stephen Hoffenberg said Epstein seemed to be like a genius, and that's why I supported him and employed him in my company. And he gave him a $2 million loan, by the way, that Epstein didn't have to repay. One of the other crazy elements of this case. He also said Epstein has no moral compass. And I think no greater truth has ever been told about Jeffrey Epstein than that.
Okay.
So it sounds like they intentionally didn't gather a lot of evidence.
100%.
So this is relevant. The reason I'm bringing it up is there's this, I said I wouldn't talk about contemporary politics, but there's this huge controversy over why isn't the DOJ releasing all this information? And my informed understanding is, at least to some extent, because they don't have it, and they don't have it because it was never gathered. And I don't know why nobody has said that publicly.
Well, because they can't, because they can contradict things they've already said and people in this administration have already said. It's true that they didn't gather a ton of evidence from him in the 2006 case and leading to the 2008 plea deal, but they did gather a lot of evidence from him in 2018 when Trump was president. That was the evidence used to convict Ghislaine Maxwell. We know that. Some of it hasn't been divulged to the public. Some of it is public and you can get your hands on. But things like his safe, which contained digital media, these were tapes with names printed on them, and we're just supposed to expect that this went away. He had CCTV cameras throughout his house, but yeah, that went away. You know, all of his associates, you know, Kash Patel and Dan Bongino talked endlessly about the lists and clients that were associated with him, information gathered from the feds. Alina Habba said, this is Trump's lawyer just months ago, said, hey, when we release this information, the names you see are going to shock you. This is going to shock the world. Bongino said this is going to end the Democrats. And the Democrats did not hoax this situation. This was brought about by right-wing populists, rightly so, I think, talking about how the state is covering up a child sex trafficking ring. And it runs the gamut through administrations. This is not exclusive to Democrats or Republicans. Both sides didn't really use this as ammo against the opposition. And now, when Trump's calling it a Democratic hoax in the vein of Russiagate and Jan 6 insurrection narrative and all that other nonsense, cover up of the Hunter Biden laptop story, it's just not believable. And that's why he's getting ratioed on Truth Social because of it.
I'm not making excuses for anybody, by the way, but it's just really interesting. So the cover-up began immediately.
100%, and went all the way up to the federal level. And then just to remind everybody where this conversation started, that U.S. attorney, future labor secretary under Donald Trump, was apparently on the record telling the people who were vetting him for the labor secretary job that the reason he cut that deal was because he was told Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone. Okay,
okay, let's just set this in time and place. The feds are basically protecting Jeffrey Epstein in 2007-ish. That's the Bush administration. Yeah. And it clearly, this is a very high-profile thing. It was in the papers. DOJ, this is their, Aosta is a U.S. attorney. He's the federal prosecutor in Southern District of Florida, correct? Mm-hmm. So what does DOJ think of this? Like, why are they involved in it?
I mean, involved in like the cover-up? I think, that's the interesting question. I go back to the question I asked earlier, like a U.S. attorney is pretty high up. He's running the Southern District of Florida's U.S. Attorney's Office. That guy, there's not that many people above his head who can tell him to drop a case like this.
Yeah, that's exactly true. That's the craziest thing about this whole thing. There weren't that many people above Acosta's head at that point. I believe the Attorney General was, Alberto Gonzalez, I believe, under the Bush administration in the second term. And there weren't that many other people above him. So who told him this? Did he get this from the Bush administration, from the deep state, from intelligence organizations? And Darryl's right about Acosta. And not only did Acosta say, hey, I laid off Epstein and gave him this deal because I was told he was intelligence, that is corroborated by several others, including Ari Ben-Banash, who said that Epstein told him that he was part of Mossad or an asset of Mossad. It's a very different thing, by the way, to be, a card-carrying member with a badge, being a Mossad agent and being an asset of Mossad, by the way. That's a very big difference. I don't even think that people like Robert Maxwell, Israel's most famous spy, was ever kind of a card-carrying member of Mossad. And I think that's one factor that's missed in this whole thing, too. But yeah, this is utterly inexplainable, and Acosta's never really had an answer for this. I think he's only been asked about it several times, and he said stuff like, well, I wouldn't read what the tabloids say about that, and he hasn't actually denied it.
I mean, you got to think about it like this, too. I mean, this is a career case for a prosecutor like Acosta. I mean, you're going to be attorney general behind this case someday,
Right.
A billionaire playboy, putting him away for his entire life because he's sexually abusing underage girls for years and years. I mean, this makes your whole career. And so to drop that, there's only a couple people and a couple reasons that somebody like him would agree to do that, and there are people whose names we've all heard probably, I think Alberto, was it Gonzalez who was attorney general at the time?
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, it's only a few people who could do that. One of the things might have something to do with it is before Jeffrey Epstein was sentenced, for whatever reason, you have this billionaire who's just the definition of a flight risk. They don't take his passport away. And before he's sentenced, he flees the country, goes to Israel, stays there for several months, moved all his money offshore by this point. And while he's in Israel, he's telling people there that he's thinking about staying because you can actually do that. They don't extradite, Jewish criminals, at least, who flee to Israel. There's a organization called Jewish Community Watch, which is a Jewish organization that tracks pedophiles who have fled the United States to go to Israel, where there's no extradition of Jewish criminals there. And between just the years, I think it was 2010 when they opened up, and 2016, 2017 when this story was written, so a period of 6 years, there were already 60 pedophiles from the United States that had fled to Israel and were living freely there.
Yeah, this is true. This is something that you'll never hear from mainstream news, but this is Israel. This is not, North Korea or Iran. This is America's greatest ally in the Middle East that you can be a pedophile, flee to, and they won't extradite you to their greatest ally overseas. Israel's not the ally of the United States. The United States is the ally of Israel to our peril. This is just one of those circumstances, but Darryl's right. This is true. This is an arrangement in Israel. They won't extradite fleeing pedophile criminals from other countries, including to the United States, the country that bankrolls their wars, bankrolls their genocide in Gaza. That's the return in favor that the United States gets for sending so much money to Israel for weapons, for military support, and for intelligence. And by the way, America shelves its foreign policy aims on behalf of Israel too, but that's another topic for another day. But yeah, this is what Epstein did. Again, this isn't widely reported either that Epstein went to Israel considering to live there forever if this plea deal didn't go the way he wanted. He was basically in waiting, negotiating through his lawyers to see if he could get a great deal. And he eventually got the deal of the century, essentially. And he eventually agreed to come back for that reason, because this wasn't really a punishment whatsoever in any regard.
Some of them had reoffended there and got thrown in Israeli jails. But so this is a thing, and Jeffrey Epstein was over there.
Why doesn't the U.S. government demand the government of Israel send them back?
I mean, you've been self-employed for a while, but when you weren't, was it your habit to go to your boss and make demands of them on a regular basis? I don't know. I mean, since when do we ever make demands on Israel? It's been a long time.
I don't know, but I that's obviously distressing. So,
yeah, I mean, Netanyahu gets to extract more demands from Trump and from Biden than vice versa. Israel certainly doesn't help the United States in any way. Our, tragic entangling alliance with them is only a destructive force for the United States. That's become more and more obvious. I'm so glad more people on the right, like these guys, are waking up to it. These guys may have thought that a long time, by the way. I'm not saying it's just a recent thing with them, but a lot of people on the right are waking up to this fact that, it was Netanyahu that got Trump to agree to kind of axe the ceasefire he arranged in Gaza as he walked into the White House. It was Netanyahu that was able to convince Trump to shelve his plan, ostensibly, to normalize relations with Iran and have a new JCPOA so that they could bomb Iran and put regime change on the table, by the way. And I really believe it was, especially if Iran really wouldn't have acted with such restraint and tipped Trump off to the fact that they were firing this retaliation strike. That's what we get for our partnership with Israel. That's just what it is.
Okay, so there's clearly a cover-up at the very beginning, and I just want to say again, I think that's one, not the totality of, but one of the reasons we don't have this information now is because DOJ doesn't have the information.
Can I tie up that last point real quick?
Please.
Just a second. So him being in Israel and at least having the threat of staying there, that may have played a role in him cutting his deal, because that's when his deal was
He's already been charged at this point.
He's awaiting sentencing.
He's been convicted?
And they don't take his passport, and he leaves the country.
He's been convicted and he leaves the country?
Correct. And his plea deal, let me back that up. His plea deal was negotiated while he was out of the country, because he didn't fight the charges. It didn't go to trial, to a jury trial or anything. He was out of the country, and his lawyers could credibly go to the DOJ.
Say that is special treatment. Did any of the J6 defendants get treatment like that?
No, I don't think so.
That's what's infuriating about all this, leaving aside a lot of other elements that are upsetting. But the most infuriating is just the two tiers or multi-tier system of justice.
This is something that...
Yeah, no one got treated better as a criminal engaging in this type of behavior, some of the most vile behavior imaginable, than Jeffrey Epstein. He was essentially treated like a king. He was given his own palace in the sheriff's department practically for these sexual offenses that he came to this plea deal for in 2008. And by the way, prominent people and politicians kept hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein after that, and they included people like Bill Clinton and Bill Gates and Ehud Barak, who lived with them for prolonged periods after he was convicted of this and after this plea bargain. He was treated in a way that no one else in the universe was for committing this type of offense. And Tucker's right. The comparison to Jan 6 offenders is apt, because they got the book thrown at them in many ways. They got treated more harshly than World War I era espionage cases, where you had people like Eugene Debs protesting the war and saying that it was a disaster, being thrown behind bars. The Jan 6 defendants got treated even worse than that in many cases. So yeah, there's a two-tiered system of justice, and there is no justice for those that are victims of the people at the top, like Jeffrey Epstein. And this is the most representative situation that really can prove that, I think.
People, I think, have not, maybe even at the highest levels, when I read President Trump's Truth Socials about it, things like that, that people are just, they don't seem to be understanding, is this isn't about some guy that sexually assaulted a bunch of girls. Like Jeffrey Epstein, for better or for worse, has become a proxy for other things. You know?
Can I interrupt you to say our faithful and gifted researcher has just held up a note saying Aosta, apparently Alex Aosta, has said, and this is different from what I described, that he never said that Epstein was connected to intelligence.
So that is not my understanding. So he was asked about it at a press conference, and he essentially refused to answer. He said, he said, I wouldn't take those media reports at face value.
Right.
And beyond that, Department of Justice policy, kind of forbids me from going any further into that. And then there was an ABC News report, and this is kind of an example of how this stuff gets out into the public mind. There was an ABC News report. It was talking about his DOJ deal back then, and they said that in the story they said that the DOJ had stated that he had no connections to intelligence, but when you actually go read the documents, that's not what was asked at all. The question was not whether he had any connections to intelligence. The question was whether he was given leniency because of cooperation that he was giving to the FBI and DOJ on cases related to Bear Stearns. And they said no to that. And it got written up in the news as him saying he had no connection to the intelligence community.
Yeah, I think Darryl's right about this. I don't think Acosta's ever outright denied this. He said stuff like, well, don't read what you see on the internet or don't read those tabloids, but he didn't outright deny it. I think Darryl's exactly right about that. And you can see how these stories are twisted, into being an outright rejection when it is on the table that he provided information to the authorities. He certainly did in the Towers financial case too, as well.
Which is not true.
The lying is like overwhelming.
Yeah. And so just so everybody understands here, I mean, this is a guy who, again, over 40 on the record witnesses, most of them underage, corroborating each other's stories independently of this guy sexually assaulting underage girls for years. He gets this non-prosecution agreement with the federal government in perpetuity, him and all of his accomplices, known and unknown, for crimes known and unknown. And it gets sent down to the state level, and he agrees to a 2-year term down there in southern Florida, not in a federal prison, not in a state prison, at the county jail, where he has, it sounds like I'm making this up, I'm not. He has his own wing of the jail to himself. His cell door remains open. He gets out on work release for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, accompanied only by security that he pays the salary of. He only has to stay the night there 6 days a week and then spend 1 day a week there in the jail. So,
and they have a television built for him there. They allow him guests. They allow him to go to various properties throughout the world that he owns. This thing just doesn't make sense unless he had some sort of intelligence connections or some connections to people in power, giving him this absolute ludicrous deal. That Darryl's right. No one could believe this. It really sounds like he's making this up, but this is what happened. This is a sexual offense with multiple victims, many dozens of victims in this case. If you or I did this, we'd be thrown away for life. This is absolutely insane.
So it's like the National Guard.
Yeah. And again, you're not talking about a guy who got busted embezzling funds. You're talking about a guy who got busted doing the thing that if you were to poll every American, I believe, and ask them, what's the worst thing? What is the worst thing that anybody can do that you would, you're against the death penalty that you might make an exception for? It's molesting little children. Everybody kind of agrees that is the red line. Everybody feels that way, that I know, that that everybody listening to this knows. And so you ask, what are the possible reasons that could be big enough and important enough that they would let a guy like this have it's insulting to the investigators, to the police, to the prosecutors to give a guy a deal like that.
Yeah, there's not many reasons this could happen. He's right. And if you apply an Occam's razor, the most reasonable explanation, it's probably intelligence ties. And I can't say that categorically. I haven't seen the smoking gun for it, but man, all the circumstantial connections are there and have been there throughout basically the entire course of Epstein's professional life. So that's where we're at, and we're not going to get answers. The Trump administration isn't going to give us answers either, and that's a true crime. So we really have to keep clamoring about this.
And
well, can I say one thing that has always struck me about this case and why I think it's like revealing of the entire power structure in the United States? Epstein, and there was public testimony from women who lived with Epstein to this effect. His contempt for Americans, sort of normal, middle class, working class Americans, he did not see them as fully human. He didn't. And at all. So it's like molesting, a high school girl from housing development or a trailer park in South Florida doesn't really count as molesting because she's a prole. Like, who cares?
Yeah.
And that attitude suffuses our leadership class. Like, that is their attitude. Yeah, 100,000 people die of fentanyl ODs. Yeah, but I mean, people. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like, it's sad, but it's not an emergency because they're like people you would never meet and you don't really care about. Just building their fucking dollar store in their town and like nobody cares about them. He really had that attitude, but that's the attitude they all have.
He had justification for having that attitude in terms of the impunity with which he operated.
Man, that is so sick, but so true. Those last two things that Tucker and Darryl said, there really is a disdain for regular people among the elite class. And Jeffrey Epstein was the perfect example of that. And his behavior, how he treated people that were on the lower tiers of society as if they were essentially humans that were devoid of rights and dignity. And that's what we've seen through this entire case. This leadership class that we have operates in such a way where they are above the law. That's why I think it was so crazy when people said, hey, we're going to throw all these charges and indict Trump in all these different states in 2024 because no one's above the law. Well, no, of course there are people above the law. Say that to the Epstein victims. You can't say that. It doesn't make sense. And this sweetheart deal is just so crazy. You wouldn't even believe it if this was a Hollywood movie about this case and about this deal. I don't think you or I could believe that. We'd say, hey, that's just a fictional reality that can't play out in public. But that did play out in the case of Jeffrey Epstein. And this is just one of those other situations revolving around Epstein's life that lead many people to believe that, hey, why would he kill himself? He had a hearing in a few days. He hadn't exhausted all of his legal recourse that would allow him to potentially get out. Maybe he could have gotten another deal under this protection umbrella that he was so clearly in back in 2008. But no, he killed himself. That's the official narrative, right? But he had gotten out of it before, and he'd gotten out of it in a way that defies reality. So that's why a lot of people still question that narrative. Now, there were other elements to Epstein's life that are also unexplainable. How he obtained his wealth. He received, millions of dollars out of the blue from Les Wexner and people like Leon Black. Leon Black gave him approximately $150 million to do his taxes, essentially. And there's no better story than that. Les Wexner, he operated as the money manager of, even though there was no real proof he was really managing Wexner's money outside of making decisions for his companies and having board members from L Brands, Wexner's company, come to him and say, hey, what's going on here? Who's this Jeffrey guy? He came out of the blue. And Wexner essentially freezing those executives out of his life in certain circumstances. The fact that Wexner gave him a $77 million mansion, the most valuable private property residency in Manhattan. All this stuff doesn't add up, and there's a lot of circumstantial things that point to the criminal underground through intelligence services and elsewhere that coat the entirety of Epstein's life. And the sweetheart deal is part of it, that show kind of the culmination. If that was true, this would actually make sense. If the story that he had, intelligence connections, including being an asset of foreign intelligence, this would make sense in some way because the feds do not want anything that would tarnish the U.S. relationship with Israel to come out to the public in such a way, even though, what they put on display for us is pretty much tarnishing that relationship in the eyes of many dissidents. But that's where we're at. Hey, great conversation between Tucker and Darryl here. Darryl knows this case backwards and forwards, and that's great to see. Let me know in the comments below, do you agree with Tucker and Darryl about this situation? Is the most important thing about the Epstein saga the fact that it kind of reveals a two-tiered system of justice? Or are there other elements about the Epstein story that still cause greater concern than even that? Let me know in the comments below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to Tucker too. This was an awesome interview, one of his best episodes, I think. And please consider becoming a YouTube member by clicking the join button below. That'll help me out and give you access to all of my videos before they go live on Facebook, and I'll greatly appreciate that if you go that length. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.